Alright, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. First and foremost, I give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai, Ba'ashim Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and elders who are in millstone for teaching us the truth. Salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is our brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I'm just going to be going through a little bit about a little bit of history, continuing on in this little mini series I have called Israelite Customs in Western Africa, right? So today's topic is really going to be surrounded the custom of polygamy, right? So for brothers who don't know, what is polygamy? What does that mean, right? So let's get the word in the etymology, right? So, like, okay, so it says polygamy in the etymology, marriage with more than one spouse, right? From the Greek polygamia. So, okay, so here it says poly means many, and gamos means marriage, right? So let's see if there's any more on that here. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Let's get this word polygamy as polygyny. So polygyny here also, it says the condition of having many wives, marriage or cohabitation of one man with more than one woman at the same time, right? So it says having many wives. So polis having is many, and gyne, it says woman or wife, right? So polygamy, right? So okay, so back to really the topic of the lesson here is so what I want to do first here is I want to read an account of the Ashanti in essentially found in was a so-called Western African tribe, right, where a lot of Israelites dwelt, right, for an extended amount of time. Now, during this period of time, fleeing from Jerusalem, a bulk of us fled into the interiors of Africa, right? What Jake did, they still at that time held on and practiced a lot of Israelite their customs, right? But as further away, I've noticed since we got further away and further away from Jerusalem, those customs slowly start to tarnish. Not tarnish per se, but we start to essentially discontinue from our heritage, like it says in Jeremiah, right? Because when a bulk of us got taken over on slave ships to different parts of the Caribbean and different parts of America and Canada and so on and so forth, what happened was, a lot of us essentially we don't really, like, for example, like I'm from the islands, we don't really practice polygamy like that in the Caribbean. No, that's not something that's more commonly practiced, but in ancient times this was very, very common, right? So this is part of our culture, this is part of our customs, right? So um I just wanted to read this. So this is a quick excerpt I found online, just going into this custom of polygamy. So it says here, and what I'll do, I'll also attach the link of this article below, right, in the description. Right, so just bear with me on this. Okay, so here it says, although there is no specific statistical information on polygamy, so it says polygamy, so back to the definition, having multiple wives, it says among the Ashanti there are fewer men than women, so that polygamy helps to assure all women will be married, right? So here it's also describing an imbalance where the men are fewer in number than women, right? So it says the fulfillment of the Ashanti's goal of success, right? So it's supposed to it's a practice that's supposed to help making sure that men, not men, excuse me, the women essentially got all women got essentially got a spouse, right? So that would involve them having to share their man, right? So a modern day example of that is what's this guy's name? Nick Cannon, right? I believe he has about I want to say like a 10. I know he has about 10 or 11 children. I forgot how many wives he has, but he has quite a few, right? So continuing on, it says here, here's the source. Here's the source um, is actually referring to the practice of one man with several wives. Polygamy is traditional among the Ashanti, one wife being the senior wife who would be consulted if any additional wives were contemplated. The Ashanti word for co-wife means jealous one. Although there were apparently families where everyone seemed uh, to rather live peacefully. Whichever wife sleeps with the husband, um, excuse me, let me read that again. It says, whichever wife sleeps with her husband cooks for him, usually for a week at a time. Disputes among the wives are not the responsibility of the husband, although he is expected to administer an orderly household. One wife, being the senior wife, would be consulted if additional wives were contemplated. The Ashanti word for co-wife, okay, so now it's just repeating, right? So it says below here, it says the idea of polygamy within the Ashanti is also supported, according to them, due to the fact that women of the Ashanti are faced with a lot of work that needs to be divided within the different wives. It says, one wife among several finds her own workload reduced, and their husband finds the work output of his immediate family increased, because their increased production increases the wealth of the husband's extended family, right? So this is so when you look at this situation practically, what happens is it's a method, that was a part of our customs, where essentially a lot of wealth can be generated. It wasn't like, when you tell people this, for example, in the world about like, having more than one wife and so on and so forth. When Jake thinks about that, Jake thinks about it um, in a very low level sense. For example, their mindset, for example, is to try and, okay, if I have more than one wife, I want to sleep with both of them at a time, or all three of them at a time, or all four of them at a time. No, that's not what's the case here. This is a method where where we were able to essentially kind of try and create more wealth, right? There's a lot more wealth established there. There is a lot more, with when you have multiple wives in that particular scenario, essentially what happens is a lot more wealth is able to be generated. It lightens up the workload. It keeps women essentially in, I don't want to say, in a very, I don't want to say a diligent might be the best word I can use to describe this, because each woman, okay, they have responsibilities, right? And this is something that Babylon the Great, known as America, doesn't actually give our women, because women have fallen from, our women especially as a nation, don't understand what it's like to properly actually be a woman, be a wife, and be essentially not a keep and maintain a household and maintain a husband, right? They know how to essentially maybe to attract a man on the physical sense, but they don't know how to actually retain a husband. So let me just finish this off here and get some scriptures, right? I want to read this again. And it says, one wife among several finds her own workload reduced, and their husband finds the work output of his immediate family increased, because their increased production increases the wealth of the husband's extended family. That group also improves the acquisition of more than one wife, so everyone is satisfied. So essentially, everybody benefits in a situation like this, right? But when you talk to Jake in the world about particular things, they think it's about, trying to pop them at the same time and have some kind of threesome. Like, no, 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 no. That's so unclean, bro. Right? So let me get a couple scriptures in regards to this, because this is part of our customs, right? So let's start with Exodus. Okay, this is Exodus chapter 21, verse 10, and it says, if he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not diminish, right? So this is what is important here, So if a man if he takes on the responsibility of another wife, these particular things, the man is ought to do, right? So, and then when you think about it, for example, relationships is very romanticized in Western culture. It doesn't actually teach the young men, especially Israelite men, to actually know how to essentially um, be responsible. Like, your woman is a responsibility, right? It's not somebody, you just you kind of pop and you leave, right? Right. But this also shows the importance of marriage. It also shows the importance of actual family, of families, her family and your family coming together, right? So let's get some examples as well. Okay, this is Genesis chapter 16. I want to start at verse 1 and read down, and it says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar, right? So this is a situation where, even our forefather Jacob also had this as well. The man would have one wife, and then she would have essentially like a handmaid. And handmaid, when you go into the etymology of it, it's essentially like a female servant, right? But as you continue on in the story, you know, Abraham had children with this woman as well, right? So it says, and Sarai said unto Abram, behold, now the Lord Yahweh hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid, if may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened unto the voice of Sarai. And Sarai's, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, right? So essentially what happens is, Hagar conceives and she ends up, bearing a son, and his name was Ishmael, right? But Sarah had her own son as well, eventually, and then his name was eventually known as Isaac, right? So the point really is here that Abraham had essentially a handmaid, but he had multiple wives, and this was something that was commonly practiced in our customs. This was not something that was like when people think about this, and for example, they think of this as kind of trivial. They think of it as crazy, because we live in a Western culture that essentially perpetuates a monogamy, and b that the man is being like unfaithful, so to speak, right? And when you watch a lot of these TV shows, it continues to perpetuate these ideas. That a man can cheat and so on and so forth, right? Like, this is not the case, right? The women were very in support of this back in these times, because back in these particular times, in these ancient times, we were more in our right mind as a people, right? So let me get another example. Okay, this is 1 Samuel 1 verse 1, and I'll read down to... Okay, I'll start at verse 1. It says, "Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. And he had two wives. The names of the name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children," right? So just for edification's sake, I'm not going to go through the whole story, but um, Peninnah, she had children, and Hannah ends up giving birth to Samuel, and Samuel was, essentially the prophet who would stand in place and actually guide King Saul, right? So he was that. This is going into the birth of Samuel, right? This is Samuel's parents, right? So this is also just to go to show like multiple different examples as I'm bringing out that polygamy or polygamy was a common practice within our culture at this particular time. This is not something that was far-fetched, in this society. Like I was saying before, our society thinks that, okay, a man could only be with one woman. Like, no, 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 that's not true. Even the Ashanti practice this. I remember one time, for example, um, I was at work and I met a Jake. He was from Ghana. So I asked him, I said, hey, so where you from? And he said to me, he was from Ghana. So I said, okay, cool. So I asked him, what tribe you from? He said, Akan. So he said, okay, cool, And I forgot how I got this, what he said, what I asked him. But I remember him asking me, I remember him telling me that he told me his father still lives in Ghana today. And his father has three wives, right? So just this is going to show, like, women were in support of this, right? But is the women here, for example, when you tell them these particular things, they might stick up their nose at it or anything like that, because a lot of women, and especially in this society, for example, a lot of these women think that they're the prize, right? But women fully in support of this, right? They would give their husband their handmaid if they couldn't conceive, for the handmaid to give them a son, give the husband a son, essentially, right? This was something that was common in our culture, right? So okay, let me get another example. Okay, First Samuel chapter 27 verse 3, and it says, "And David dwelt with Achish at Gath, and his men, every man, and his household, even David with his two wives, Anohim the Jezreelites, and Abigail the Carmelites, Nabal's wife," right? So just so there's no confusion, when you go back in his story, Nabal was first married to Abigail, but essentially what happened was Nabal ended up was smitten by the Lord, and then David essentially was able to take her Abigail to be his wife, right? So this is also just going into different examples as well, that the Lord was okay with this. The Lord wasn't upset, that essentially a man, or David, for example, was having more than one wife. This was something that was common. This was something within our culture, right? I remember another example. I had a conversation with a woman, and she was telling me some madness about how um, um, how the Lord essentially was angry with David because he had more than one wife. And I said, no, that's not true. And I corrected her and I said that wasn't the reason. The Lord was upset and angry with David because he took a wife. He laid with a woman essentially that wasn't essentially married, right? So when you go through David's story, one of his transgressions was adultery, right? He slept with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, right? So, um, so you can understand the different examples of different of our forefathers had multiple wives, and the Lord wasn't, this was part of our culture, so to speak. This was not something that was random. This wasn't something that was crazy, right? Um, so what I want to do also as well, before I wrap up the lesson, I kind of want to touch on another side of this as well. So I'm just going to jump to First Corinthians 10 and 23. So it says, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. Right? So let me get this word expedient in the etymology. So okay, so expedient in etymology, it says advantageous, fit, proper to a purpose. It says beneficial. It says make fit or ready. A device adopted and a device adopted in exigency, that it serves to advance a desired result, right? So the reason I'm reading this precept as well, because there's a caveat to essentially why I'm bringing out this information. I'm bringing out this information to make known that, okay, this is part of our customs. Yes, men can have more than one wife, but knowing this information, especially if you're just finding out that you're an Israelite and you belong to one of the 12 tribes and you belong to a glorious nation with glorious history and so on and so forth, somebody can take this and run with it and essentially kind of destroy themselves, right? And I'm also bringing this precept out to let you know that just because it is lawful for a man to have more than one wife, this may not be expedient for you. This may not be advantageous. This may not be beneficial for you in this particular time. Also, you have to consider a plethora of different things. Number one, your situation. You may not be in a situation where you're able to, have more than one wife. I was just explaining the benefits of, okay, why in our culture it was beneficial for us to have more than one wife, right? But at the same time, we live in a time where there is wars, there is rumors of wars, there is civil war brewing, and in this particular time it may not be advantageous for you to have more than one wife, right? It might just be a hindrance for you. It might be a hinder, it might be a stumbling block, it might be detrimental for your development, right? And just going back into the precept I brought out earlier, it's a responsibility, right? So that's one of the reasons I'm bringing out this particular precept. If brothers have that, kudos, and they're able to, manage that, kudos. But I'm also showing another side to this particular um, lesson as well, right? It's yes, that's great and that's wonderful, but also keep in mind, your own personal situation, especially the times that we're living in, right? you know especially what happened, and then also keep in mind the things that happened 2-3 years ago with the demic, right? A lot of these women took the syringe, right? So do you honestly have candidates lined up who are pleasant, who can actually be expedient to your situation, right? To consider these particular things, right? And one of the last precepts I also want to bring out to this caveat is an account with King Solomon, right? So I'm going to go to First Kings. Also proving the first point, that multiple wives was in our culture. So it says First Kings 11:1, and it says, But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord Yahweh said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go in to them, neither they shall come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after other gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. Verse 3, it says, so here, going back to the first point, he had 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Right. So this is the caveat. This is the this is the the cautionary tale, right? So this is why we read these and go into these accounts, right? Because the things that are written before time are written for our learning, right? So Solomon dealt with all these different wives, and look what happened when he got older. What happened when he got older, his mind, essentially his heart, his lab, was turned away from Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, right? So, and then essentially when you read through the story, I'll read a little bit more. It says, For it came to pass when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his power, as was the David his father, right? So David didn't, make strange idols and set up erect temples for all these other gods, right? So it says, verse 7, that Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the high place that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. Likewise, he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrifice unto their gods, right? So this is why the Lord was angry with Solomon, because not because he had essentially multiple wives, but it was the fact that his mind was turned away. And essentially what happens now, he's just transgressing against the Heavenly Father, right? What does that look like when you use like today's terms? Like, for example, if you have more than one wife and your wife says, one of your wives say to you, for example, oh, let's go do some palm reading, let's go seek out a medium, for example, something like that, right? There's a lot of those, in the city. Let's go talk to a wizard or a witch or something like that. Like, no, right? That's when you have to like realize, okay, you realize and you show her and you teach her, no, that's not something we do, right? Now, this is the caveat to this, right? His mind was turned away, right? So knowing this information, that yes, it's a wonderful thing, for a man to have multiple wives, right? At the same time, your mind can be turned away from Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. That's really the caveat. And the second part, the second essentially the second, what's the word I'm looking for, point that I would like to make in regards to this polygamy, right? So because for example, there's a lot of our women, for example, I go to churches and do this and bow down to JC, Caesar Borgia and all this kind of stuff, and there's a lot of adultery as well that happens in the church as well. But nevertheless, that's really the point, the mind being turned away from Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, right? Paul says in 2 Corinthians, we're to be essentially a chaste, I've espoused you to one husband, chaste, right? That's how the Lord wants us as Israelite men to be chaste. It's not that we can't deal with women. It's, our minds can be turned away from the Lord and committing essentially adultery by serving other gods, so to speak, right? Anyways, I've gone on long enough, but I really hope and pray that this lesson was edifying. I don't think there was anything else I had to cover, but that's pretty much it. But I sincerely hope and pray that this lesson was edifying. I'd like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth. Till next time, I say Shalom.